Okay. Now let's say your test manager or your team gives you a requirement to test. Now it
Hmm.
is changing very frequently. There
Hmm.
was a story card that was created in the this test management tool Jira you might be using, and there were three
Correct.
acceptance criteria written for that particular Jira card in that story.
Hmm.
Now
Hmm.
the first week you tested it, and there was a change request coming up from the stakeholder or from the PO, and they
Hmm.
have removed the third acceptance criteria and they have inserted a new acceptance criteria. So this
Correct.
kind of requirements are changing frequently from the management side. So how will you
Hmm.
deal when these things are happening into the projects?
See, ideally, when they are changing the requirement, they are building this CR document,
Hmm.
change request document. Apart
Correct.
from that, if the requirement changes in the mid sprint, we can't really do any much about it. Okay, but
Hmm.
we try to incorporate it in the next sprint, and we will discuss with our managers, and we can do whatever the testing as per the new criteria is.
Hmm. Right. So, and apart from this, what people should do is they should create one sort of, test case repository. And
Okay,
at the end of the release, they should highlight that so and so test cases were written, and this much
correct.
amount of time was invested by a tester or by an individual
Hmm.
on,
Correct,
brainstorming testing for this particular XYZ requirement, which later on got removed. So you can showcase
correct, correct,
your
correct,
efforts to the management that because of these changes in the requirement, the time and effort of the testing is basically getting wasted on
correct,
this
correct. This
kind
can
of
be a
thing.
good way of tracking the
Yeah,
test cases which is carried forward as well.
right.
Correct.
And this is also a good way of showcasing your individual efforts. Basically tomorrow if someone asks, that where is your time getting invested? Why are you finding the defects at the very later stage of the uh, when of the release, when we are about to release and you are coming up with a high severity defect? So these all things can help you to cope up over there. Okay, fine. So what is the difference between user story and the task?
User stories basically it's a collection of the requirements lined up by a Scrum Master, which are
Mhm.
to be taken into the sprint. So that thing is called as a user stories. And this
Right.
user stories, when taken into the sprint, they can be called as a task, which are needed to be performed both by developers as well as testers, and make sure that it will be delivered by the end of the sprint.
Mhm. And what is epic?
Epic, epic, epic. I can't recollect.
Okay, so generally epic is a group of related user stories that is called an epic.
Okay.
So whenever you know a very wide requirement that is coming up from the stakeholders, right? That they need an
Hmm.
e-commerce website. Let's say if they come up with this requirement, so building an e-commerce website is an epic. Now from that epic, they can draw the user stories. Okay, one user story is of adding search functionality into the e-commerce website. One user story would be of navigating into the website and selecting the products and adding them to the cart. Another user story can be of performance testing of how many users can an e-commerce site can accept at a one particular time. So this is called the various user
Correct.
stories. And so you can take an example of Mahabharata. So Mahabharata
Correct.
is an epic, right? And other
Hmm.
within all the entire this epic, there are various modules or various chapters that are coming.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Okay. Now let's say you have found out a defect and you are very sure that it's a defect, but still the development team or the developer who has worked on that story, he's not getting convinced by the defect. So what steps you will take?
Basically, I'll try to explain the developer with the kind of requirement I have, with the kind
Okay.
of performance which I've did. Okay, while testing with the kind of steps I've performed, and will try to convince the developer that the tests which are performed are correct for the starter. So I will ask the developer if the developer can check the steps which I've performed. If when that part is getting clear that the tests which are performed to execute the test cases is correct, then I will convince the developer that the defect which is caused by this by execution of these steps it should be accepted.
Correct. So screenshots you can give. Apart from that,
Correct, correct,
those artifacts are there, and then there is also a log file. So whenever you work on
correct.
any product or you test any product, so there will be a log file you can change the mode of the log file to debug. So whichever the exceptions that are coming at the runtime, all those exceptions directly, internal server errors or runtime errors, all those things will be generating into the log files. So these
Log
log
files.
files you can take and you can zip and attach it into the, with the Jira ticket or with the issue defect itself, so that
Correct.
the developer can directly jump into the code and he can start debugging over there.
Correct. Correct.
Okay. Now consider that you were working on some product and that product got released and it is working fine in the production. But all of a sudden, on one fine day, you got a call from the customer or from the client that there are issues in the production environment. So how will you deal with this kind of situation?
First of all, I'll check if that issue has been covered in my test cases or not. If the issue is covered in the test cases, I'll go for the screenshots. If the screenshots are fine, I'll approach the client and tell the client that this has been properly working when I was testing it. But there might be a condition where the code is been promoted to the production, and at that time during integration, it might have got mixed up. So I'll speak to the developer and ask the developer if we could find the root cause analysis over this, because the test cases, because the evidence which I have taken are correct.
Mhm. Correct. And let's say uh, they are satisfied with your answer, like the testing has been performed at the test environment or at the dev environment, but still
Correct.
the things are not working as per the expectation in the production environment. So how will you further dig down into this? Like how will you go for root cause analysis?
I'll try to speak to developer and ask the developer to give me the exact same build on my local machine as well. I'll try to analyze that defect which has happened in the production. I'll try to reproduce that same defect on my machine. I'll try
Mhm.
to check if that defect is getting reproduced or not. If that defect is getting reproduced, then the problem was with the build. So I'll tell
Mhm.
the developer that the problem was with the build and you can fix it.
Correct. Yeah, so if you can, create a mirror image of the production environment, so that would
Correct.
be very much helpful for reproducing the same kind of defect. Maybe in the test environment, it might would have been tested with 500 users, but all of a sudden in the production environment, 600 users are using them. So maybe
Correct. Correct.
then you would be able to reproduce that defect. Again, you can take up another details also, like what is the environment over there. Are they using a virtual machine like which is built up on AWS or Azure
Mhm.
or on cloud,
Mhm.
and or is it a simple physical machine, local machine that they are using? Then apart from that, you can
Mhm.
take the details of operating system. What is the RAM? What is the how much GB space is there? Then is it 32-bit? Is it 64-bit? In last 24 hours, did any update come to the system? So all those things you can diagnose and you can
Browser
basically.
compatibility as well.
Right, perfect. So that was the correct answer. Okay. So what is the difference between severity and priority?
Severity is basically the criticality of that defect.
Mhm.
Criticality as per the which is causing our application to fail. For example, if the user is not able to log in into the system, that is high priority, that the defect has to be fixed on the high priority, and it's
Mhm.
also high severity because the business might get affected due to it.
Correct.
Apart from that, if I give you the example that on the login page the name of the company is given incorrectly, but that
Mhm.
thing is not affecting our functionality, so the
Mhm.
severity might be low, but the priority might be low, the severity is high, if I'm answering it correctly.
Right. I think the severity of this defect would be low because it is not
Low.
affecting the functionality. The spelling mistake is there. Let's
Correct.
say
Correct. Correct.
Amazon.com. Yeah. So
Correct.
spelling mistake is there. You are able to add the product to the cart and go.
But since the business might get affected
Right.
due to this, the
Priority is
credibility
high.
of the business might get affected, that's why
Mhm.
the priority is high.
Priority is high. Absolutely. Okay. So what is the difference between load testing and stress testing?
Load testing is basically test on the functionality level. For example, if we are using payment gateway, we
Mhm.
try to make as many as payment concurrently at the same time, and to see if the functionality is getting crashed or not. Stress testing is basically creating a simulated environment. So, and we are asking users to log in at the same time. So basically we are checking the maximum threshold of that system at which
Mhm.
that system might get crashed. or that system might hamper its productivity, like
Mhm.
performance issue.
Right. Correct. So load testing is testing the behavior of the application or the response of the application within the specified user limit, while stress testing is
Correct.
testing beyond the limit. Okay.
Beyond the limit.
Right. So if 1000 users are the acceptable users for a particular website or application, then load testing is testing first with the load on the application for 10 users, 100 users, 200, and simultaneously increasing till 1000. We won't go beyond
1000.
1000.
Correct.
But for stress testing, we will start from 1001th user itself. Okay.
Correct.
So this is how it is. Okay, fine. So what is the difference between regression testing and retesting?
Retesting, basically whenever any functionality or any defect which we have raised is fixed and it is assigned back to us.
Mhm.
Now testing that defect again is called as a retesting. Regression testing is basically testing all the functionalities of the product, because it might happen that because of one fix the other functionalities might get affected. So we are testing all the functionalities again to make sure that everything is working fine.
Mhm.
That's regression testing.
That's regression, right? Okay. Now consider a scenario where you have to release the build, you have to release the product in 2 days, and you have got 1500 test cases in your test management tool. So what would be your approach? What would be your testing approach so that and it has to be released? Okay, we cannot hold the release, or we cannot convince the management that or we cannot raise a red flag over here because it would affect the business then. So what test approach will you implement so that you can get the maximum confidence at the time of releasing the build?
I'll prioritize the test functionalities. All the main functionalities I'll try to cover first. So as soon as the main functionality will get covered, that particular product can be made live. So it won't affect the user functionality of that product. So I'll try to narrow down my functionality as per into the more important functionalities, and I'll target those functionality and test those functionality first.
Correct. So whichever the highly affected or the business related scenarios are there, those you will be targeting first.
Correct. Correct.
Perfect. Okay. So what is the difference between smoke testing and sanity testing?
Okay, smoke testing is a subset of the acceptance testing. Sanity testing is a subset of the regression testing. So whenever developer is giving us a build, we have to make sure that that build is ready for testing. We cannot really directly jump into the testing, because if the build is not ready, if the build is not proper, if it is causing the system to crash, then it is wastage of our time. So we basically make sure that the build is proper or not. That's called sanity testing. Sorry, smoke testing.
Smoke.
And in sanity testing, what we do, all the main functionalities are working properly or not. All the main functionality which were working initially properly before the build was given to us, we have to make sure that that functionalities are working proper.
Mhm. Right. So how will you judge that whether this build, 1.0.3 or something build number, this build is good fit for testing? What would be your acceptance criteria for starting the testing on that build?
I'll check what the build was supposed to do. If the
Mhm.
build was supposed to perform a certain functionality, I'll directly jump into that functionality, and based on my experience, I'll just randomly run few test cases on it, and I'll check if that build is properly working as per my expectation or not. And if the build is not working as my expectation, I'll fail that smoke testing.
Right. Mhm. Okay. Now, consider a scenario where you have one of your team member and you both were working on one particular project, and he has written 200 test cases. You have also written 200 test cases. Now, in next 24 hours, your test manager comes to you and he tells, Ajay, you have to release, as a testing team, you have to release this product. Okay. Now you got a message from your team member that he will be on sick leave today. So how will you manage the work?
So the test cases which we have written, we maintain RTM for it as well. So
Mhm.
I'll have the direct reference of the requirement for which he has written all the test cases. So based on that requirement, I can check all the test cases by written by him, and I can perform those test cases. Also, there is something called as test suite. Right,
Mhm.
test suite is a collection and clubbing of the test cases together. First, I'll try to figure out what are the test cases which my test cases and the test cases which are written by him are similar kind of, I'll club those test cases together.
Mhm.
So that might be one of our way.
Correct. Right. So, generally when in the companies, when you'll go for interviews, so they'll ask you this kind of situational questions, and then they'll also give you the solution like, would you like to discard their test cases, or would you like to start the test cases of his stories by your own? So the answer that you gave was on the correct side. We should not discard the test cases because ultimately it's an effort of the team member itself. And
Correct.
rather, if you don't know the user story, then you can go through the user story in the Jira or whichever tool it is there, and then you can execute his test cases. So this kind of
Correct.
questions might be put up in this way also into the companies. Okay. So, mhm. So any particular defect or any bug that you have come across so far, for which the organization would have, you know, awarded you, or they would have recognized you. So would you like to share that defect with us?
So basically, I was testing a death functionality, okay, and it was on on a rare policy which had a 5 coverage. Now, whenever you are buying a policy, there is a base coverage, and apart from there are the additional rider coverage as well. So this was a death reopen functionality where I do the death claim intimation, okay, and the status of the policies become death, including all those coverages as well. And when we are doing death claim reopen, the status of that particular coverages, all those coverages should go back from death to premium paying. So, but whenever
Okay.
we were doing that functionality on a on the policy which has 5 coverages, it was getting crashed. It was
Oh.
not working properly. Although this functionality was working properly on those coverages which have 2 or 3 coverages, on those
Mhm.
policy which have 2 or 3 coverages. So
Mhm.
that was a rare find, and that was one of a critical defect which I found.
Okay, great. Yeah, good to know that. So you are basically testing the uh, project in the insurance domain,
Correct.
right? So what are all the different checklists or the scenarios that you will create or that you will develop to test the insurance policies?
See, basically, insurance domain now, whenever we are writing the test cases, whenever we are writing the scenario, it is broadly categorized into two phases: day one functionality and day two functionality. See, whenever you are buying a insurance policy, it is unlikely that the maturity will happen within one single year. Maturity never happens within one single year. So I'll categorize what is day one functionality and what is day two functionality. And while I'm doing the product release, I'll narrow down to my day one functionality and I'll test those. There can be anything. Whenever you are buying a policy, there is a FLC, pre-look cancellation, that is a 15 days of pre-look period which is given to us. There's a premium calculation whether premium is properly calculated or not. Apart from that, there is a CDA, cash dishonor, if you are paying a money to the insurance company and the case and the check is getting bounced or not, renewal cashiering, and there are CDR. There are few test cases which has to be performed in a single policy year. Okay, these are a thing which I we concentrate on. Apart from that, there is a normal basic checklist like basic validations. While
Correct.
we are for example, if we are buying a policy, then the basic sum assured which we could take for that policy is 2 lakh. So that's the
Mhm.
basic validation we can check over it by using boundary value method.
Correct. Yeah. So very important use case. Mhm. So how many test cases do you execute in a day?
Test cases, we don't really work on the test cases, we work on the scenarios. Because in insurance, if I could tell you, there are 10-15 main functionalities which are to be tested,
Mhm.
and we can directly narrow down to the scenario depending on the client requirement, depending on the product deadline. We decide our scenarios and we execute.
Correct. Mhm. So, so on the basis of test scenarios, you people are executing. That's a good approach because test cases, it depends on companies to companies. Some companies have generated and developed their test cases. Let's say they have got 2000 test cases into the repository. Now they don't have
Correct.
any new functionality to be covered. So they'll go in a repeat mode of
Correct.
executing those
Correct.
test cases and releasing the product. Well, some
Exactly.
organizations have got enhancements into the existing feature. So they'll have
Correct.
those bunch of test cases. Apart from that, they'll have additional test cases. So together chunk they need to execute, and then they'll be able to give a green signal to the management that they are good to release. Well,
Correct,
for
correct.
you, it's a test scenario. So again, it's a good thing that the management is supporting, and the way you have put up the things, like it's on the basis of test scenarios. So it's good. Okay.
So basically, even whenever we are working in the agile also, na, it is not possible to write all the test cases in the stipulated time. So what we do in agile, we maintain the documentation to the lowest, right? So maintaining the test scenario is comparatively easier than maintaining test cases or writing test cases in a given sprint.
Right. It happens. Okay. So what do you mean by object and what do you mean by class?
Class is basically a collection of the methods, variables, and everything. An object is basically something which we make to access those methods.
Right. Now, what do you mean by product backlog?
Product backlog is basically the requirements,
Mm-hmm.
or basically the stories which are on the storyboards. We can call them as a product backlog. That means what are basically, if we are developing a whole product, the
Mm-hmm.
requirement from start to end, that
Mm-hmm.
requirement we can term as a product backlog.
Mm-hmm. Right. So the stories which are going to be, are not a priority as of now, but they might be taken up in the upcoming sprint or in the upcoming iterations, but are not a part of current iteration. So those are product backlog. Okay, Ajay. Do you have any questions for me?
No, sir.
Yeah. So I'm done with the interview. It was glad talking to you and having you on our, YouTube channel, RD Automation Learning. So thank you for
Same
your
here.
time. Yeah. And let's hope that we connect soon virtually. And if any assistance is required from our channel side, do let us know. Okay.
Sure, sure, sure. Thank you for giving me your time, and this will definitely help me for the future interviews.
Yeah, definitely. All the best for your career.
Thank you.